This morning, Walter McCready held a leash like a prayer and realized he had no one left to ask for mercy but a dog. Some men outrun the years. Others learned to walk beside them. Boone's muzzle had gone white, his eyes glassy with old storms. Yet he still rose when Walter whispered his name. There are choices that cost more than money, and love that keeps you honest when nothing else does. The road to town was only 12 miles. The road after would be longer. Dawn came flat and pale over the Flint Hills. October light stretched thin as gauze. Walter McCready stood on his porch in Chase County, Kansas, the boards cupping his tired feet like an old handshake. He wrapped a braided leather leash twice around his palm until it pressed his knuckles white. Boone rose slow from his blanket by the door. He was an Australian cattle dog, blue mottled and thick through the shoulders the way working dogs get when work is their whole biography. A white blaze ran down his muzzle. One ear had a nick from a winter fence line. His left eye held a milked-over sheen from the cataracts, shimmering like frost. Easy, old boy, Walter said. Boone's hips trembled, the kind of shiver pain makes when it tries not to be seen. He steadied himself against Walter's leg. Breath warm, smelling faintly of hay and the sweet iron of old blood. The leash had been braided by Elena McCready in a June that would never come back. Nell's hands were small and quick, strong from shelling beans and turning soil, patient in a way the times rarely are. She would stamp Boone into a brass tag with a dent where it had met the porch step the day the dog chased a rabbit clear to the cottonwoods. Walter thumbed the tag like a rosary. Today we go to town, he told the leash. Told himself, told the years. Cottonwood Falls was 12 miles. The veterinary clinic on the edge of it, where the highway side and the coopets feed, dust hung in the parking lot like a blessing. Inside the house the radio muttered the farm report. He shut it off and listened instead to the silence Nell used to fill. In the sink, an enamel mug wore a ring of coffee like a calendar. Out in the yard, the wind leaned through bluestem that had turned the color of rusted wheat. Walter helped Boone down the steps one paw at a time. The dogger's nails clicked a careful rhythm, a metronome for the day's patience. The truck was a '96 Ford with a seat torn open at the seam. When he lifted Boone into the cab, the dog made a low sound deep as a creek under ice. Walter's back complained the way old wood complains, but he did not let go until Boone was settled. He had put off this day longer than was kind. Boone had been stiff for a year canine osteoarthritis. Mira Patel had said last spring, running a gentle thumb along the ridge of Boone's spine. They would tried carprofen and gabapentin, a sprinkle of glucosamine in the feed, warm compresses and slow walks at dusk when the meadowlarks were closing shop. Then the cough started. Not every day, but enough to sound like a door in the house of Boone had begun to close. Last week there had been a faint red smear on the blanket, a coin-sized worry Walter pretended was nothing until it would not be. He turned the key, coaxed the truck awake. The heater stuttered. Merle Haggard ghosted up on the old speakers. Boone's head came to rest in Walter's lap, carrying the weight of 1,000 evenings, where the dog had never once asked more than to be near. Cottonwood Veterinary sat behind a windbreak of elms. The parking lot smelled of disinfectant and hay and the sweet stale of dog biscuits. A poster on the door showed an old retriever with the heading Senior Dog Care. Arthritis, kidney disease, heart health words that sounded like both salvation and a bill he might not meet. Inside, a tech named Ashley Gomez crouched to Boone's level. "Hey there, handsome," she said, letting Boone smell her knuckles before laying a hand on his shoulder. "Let us get your weight, friend." Boone had lost 5 pounds since spring. On the scale he looked smaller, as if the years had been quietly carving him down, a patient carpenter with a fine rasp. Ashley noted it on a chart and spoke softly. "The way you do around any kind of holy." Patel came in with tired kindness around her eyes. "Morning, Walt." "Morning, Boone." Her touch moved like water over stones. Testing gums. Listening to the chest, where air had begun to stack up. "I hear the cough," she said. "Has he been drinking more? Any accidents in the house? We should run blood work CBC." Chemistry panel. Check kidney and liver values. And I would like thoracic X-rays to look at his heart and lungs. The words landed gentle but solid, like fence posts tapped true. Walter nodded. Money had been thin since the leaseback deal on the land he used to own. He fixed neighbors' tractors now, cut hay for wages, kept the lights on with stubbornness and late notices. "I can manage," he said, though he did not know how yet. Boone licked his wrist, a vote of confidence that felt like a loan he meant to repay. "Do what he needs." They drew Boone's blood. He did not flinch, watching Walter instead, the way an old friend watches the weather in a man's face. The vial filled dark and burgundy and honest. In the X-ray room, the plate was cold under Boone's ribs. Ashley held him in a hug that was also a restraint, murmuring, "Good boy, good boy," until the machine sighed and the picture caught what the heart would rather keep hidden. On the way back to the exam room, Boone paused to sniff a basket of laundry towels that smelled like other dog stories. Walter sat, leash slack over his knees. He could have closed his eyes and seen Nell's hands again, the way she would kneaded bread on a Thursday, flour blooming like smoke up her wrists. The leash remembered those hands. It held their pattern. The clinic had a bulletin board near the counter. Somebody had tacked up a flyer about canine palliative care and in-home hospice. Words that sounded like a final pasture with good grass and no coyotes. Below it, a box for donations to help families pay vet bills held a few singles and the thump of some stranger's hope. Patel returned holding the X-rays like small windows. Her mouth was set in that careful way people learn when they have to say hard things for a living. She closed the door behind her, shut out the bustle and the hum in the world where everything is fixable if you bring the right wrench. "Walt," she said, and the name itself was an embrace. "We found something on Boone's films." She tapped the corner of the image, where shadow made a country of its own. Boone's head lifted at the sound of Walter's breath. The leash grew heavy in his hands, as if leather could remember the weight of years. Through the window, the wind worried the elms, and the sky kept its blue like a secret. Patel met his eyes. "I am afraid it can to wait." The room held still around that sentence, the way a field holds still when lightning chooses it. Walter did not drop the leash. He wound it tighter until the braid pressed his skin and the brass tag kissed bone. "Some roads you follow behind a wagging tail," Some you walk by carrying the one who carried you. Part 2. The shadow on the film. Walter kept his thumb on Boone's brass tag, as though the little disc could steady him against whatever storm the doctor was about to name. Patel laid the X-ray on the light box, and the black and white glow filled the small exam room with something colder than winter. "There is a mass here," she said, pointing to Boone's chest. Her finger traced the shadow lodged like a stone, where breath was supposed to move free. "It looks like a tumor, possibly his lungs, maybe even pressing on the heart. We will need an ultrasound to know more." The word tumor split the air. Walter felt it like a fence post cracking in frost. Boo only shifted, laid his head on Walter's knee, eyes dim but trusting. "How long?" Walter asked, his voice stripped thin. Patel hesitated. She was a woman who preferred truth over mercy. "Months, maybe. It depends how aggressive it is. With palliative care, pain management. Maybe steroids he could have comfort. But it is not something we can cure." Walter looked down at Boone. The dogg's breathing was shallow, a little hitch at the end of each inhale, but the tail still thumped once on the tile, like hope insisting on being counted. "Months?" He thought of Nell's voice, the way she would always said, "We do not measure love in years, Walt. We measure it in days we do not waste." Ashley slipped in and placed a hand on Boone's head. "He has still got spirit," she said softly. Walter swallowed hard, the leash biting into his palm. "Spirit's not enough to keep a man alive. Or a..." Patel gave him a sheet of options tramadol. Prednisone. Palliative care services, words that felt less like medicine and more like instructions for building a slow goodbye. Walter folded the paper into his coat pocket, as if hiding it might undo the truth. The ride home was quiet except for Boone's breathing. Every bump in the county road rattled through the old truck, but Boone pressed closer, his body leaning against Walter's side the way he had on long nights when storms bent the power lines and Nell's candlelight held them steady. The hills rolled past, grass burnt orange under the weak sun. A hawk traced circles overhead. Walter gripped the wheel and thought about the years Boone had worked. Cattle, herding strays back through broken gates, nipping heels with patience carved from instinct. Now the land rolled empty. The herd was gone, sold off 2 winters ago when the bank pressed too hard. It was only him and Boone now, ghosts living on borrowed ground. At the farmhouse, Walter helped Boone down from the cab. The dog's legs wobbled, but he made it to the porch steps. Walter lifted him the last rise, muttering, "Don't you worry, old boy. I have carried worse loads in my life." Inside, the house smelled of dust and the faint sweet rot of apples gone soft in the cellar. Walter dropped his coat over the chair where Nell's quilt still hung. The colors faded like pressed flowers. Boone lay by the stove, head on his paws. Walter stirred the fire, the flames catching on cedar split last winter. For a moment, the crackle filled the silence that had been living with him longer than Boone's sickness. He looked at the leash on the table, leather soft from years of use. Nell's work. Nell's patience. Everything that mattered in his life seemed tied to hands that were no longer there. That night, Boone coughed again. The sound dragged Walter out of half sleep. He leaned over, stroking the dog's back until the cough quieted, until Boone's breathing settled into shallow tides. Walter stayed awake long after, staring at the cracked ceiling where moonlight carved pale scars across the plaster. He thought of the vet bills coming. He thought of the tractor parts he still had to deliver by Friday. He thought of time, and how it runs quicker when you want it slow. "Don't he leave me yet?" he whispered, though Boone was already asleep. The words floated useless in the room, like prayers no one collects. The next morning, Walter carried a bucket of water to the yard. Boone followed, stiff-legged but determined, stopping halfway to rest under the pecan tree. A chain of blackbirds startled from the branches, wheeling up into a sky too big for any one man's sorrow. Walter set the bucket down and looked at his land leased out now, other men's cattle grazing where his had once stood. He remembered Nell's laughter echoing across these pastures, Boone running circles around her as if to keep joy corralled. Now all that remained was the sound of wind in grass. Boone barked once, sharp but thin, and Walter turned. The dog's eyes, cloudy though they were, fixed on him with a clarity sharper than words. Walter understood. Boone was not asking for pity. He was asking for one more day worth remembering. That afternoon, Walter loaded the shotgun into the truck bed. Not for Boone, he was not there yet, but for the coyotes that had been edging closer to the henhouse. Still, the weight of the gun pressed against another kind of thought, darker and heavier, one he could not admit even to himself. He drove into town, Boone beside him, to pick up the medication Pattle had prescribed. Ashley handed him the small white bottles, her smile carrying more pity than she meant. "Call us any time." "McCready," she said. "We will help however we can." Walter thanked her, voice rough. Outside, Boone paused to sniff a child's mitten dropped in the parking lot. He nudged it once, then looked up at Walter as if to say, "Even the small things matter." Back home, Walter mixed the first pill into a spoonful of canned beef stew. Boone licked it clean, tail wagging slow. Relief and ache mingled in Walter as chest relief that the dog still had appetite. Ache that each meal now carried the weight of medicine. He sat on the porch steps with Boone beside him. The sun set behind the ridge, turning the sky bruised purple. Walter's hand rested on the leash coiled beside him. He could still feel Nella's fingers in the braid, her faith woven into every strand. "Guess it is just you and me," he murmured. Boone leaned closer, the warmth of his body more honest than any words. The wind picked up. Walter closed his eyes, hearing again Patel's voice, the careful weight of it. "I am afraid it can't wait." He knew she would been right, but he did not yet know what Boone was waiting for, or whether he had the strength to walk that last mile beside him. That night, Walter dreamed of Nell. She stood at the edge of the pasture, Boone at her side. Young again, running fast and sure. She called his name, smiling the way she used to when supper was ready and the world still felt whole. Walter tried to run to them, but his legs would not move. When he woke, Boone was at the foot of the bed, chest rising shallow, eyes on him as if asking, "What now?" "Walt." The question rattled in his bones. spoken but louder than any storm. Before we begin part 3, take a moment to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts about the 2 stories. It may seem like a small gesture, but it truly helps keep these timeless tales alive. This story still has a long way to go, so if you do not have time to watch it all now, do not forget to save it and come back whenever you are ready. Part 3, Boone's question. Walter sat at the kitchen table with the leash coiled in front of him, like a snake that would not strike, but would not leave either. Boone lay by the stove, his breathing shallow, a soft whistle on the exhale. The house smelled of cedar smoke and liniment, a mixture of past winters and present ages. The question still hung in the room. What now? Walter had no answer. The years had taken Nell, then the cattle, then the land. Now the dog was next, and there was nothing left to bargain with. He rubbed at the brass tag, thumb circling the letters until the skin went raw. "Don't he look at me like that?" he muttered, but Boone did, steady and unflinching, as if loyalty had nothing to do with choice. The following morning, Walter drove into town for feed and aspirin. Boone stretched across the truck seat like a faded quilt. Each cough from the dog felt like a nail hammered into Walter's chest. Still, the tail wagged when they passed the grain elevator, as if memory itself could wag. At the hardware store, a neighbor named Earl Whitcomb shuffled over. "Dog do not look so good, Walt." Walter nodded. "Jaw tight. Old bones," he said, though the truth weighed heavier. Earl clapped his shoulder, but his eyes carried pity, the kind that burns worse than judgment. When he came out, Boone was watching through the cracked window, ears cocked unevenly. Walter opened the door, and Boone licked his wrist once. A reminder, we leave no man behind. Back at the farm, the sky broke open with rain. It was steady, cold, soaking the bluestem until the land smelled like iron and memory. Walter and Boone sat on the porch steps, shoulders pressed, watching water trace down the gravel. Walter thought of Nell again, how she used to walk barefoot in storms just to feel the earth clean itself. Boone had chased her then, barking at lightning as though he could herd the sky. Now his head rested heavy on Walter's knee, too tired to chase anything but time. "You still got fight." Walter whispered. Boone lifted his head, gave a half-hearted woof, then coughed until the sound turned wet. Walter pulled him closer, heart cracking in rhythm with each hack. That night, the pills seemed to help. Boone ate supper with decent appetite, tail wagging slow but steady. Walter felt a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame. Afterward, he fetched the old photo album from the hall closet. Dust rose in small ghosts as he laid it on the table. Boone padded over, stiff but willing, and laid his chin on the pages. There was Nell in her garden, Boone still young, ears sharp as arrowheads. There was Boone in the truck bed, nose to the wind, guarding every mile. There was Nell's handwriting on the back of one photo. Our boys, always looking after each other. Walter shut the album quick. Breath hitching. The dog was looking at him again. That same question. What now? Morning brought frost along the porch rails. Walter stepped outside with Boone, slow but determined. the leash looped gentle in his hand. They made it as far as the edge of the pasture. Boone stopped there, looking across the land as if trying to memorize it. The cattle were gone, but the grass still bowed in the wind, and the pecan tree stood where it always had. Boone sat, chest rising shallow, watching the horizon. Walter knelt beside him. "This is where we did our best work, is not it?" Boone wagged his tail once, eyes bright for a heartbeat, and then his body trembled. He sank lower, sides heaving, a cough rattling deep until it seemed to tear. Walter wrapped both arms around him, whispering Nell-souled words. "You are home, Boone. You are home." But Boone did not rise right away. For a moment, Walter thought the pasture had claimed him then and there. When Boone finally stirred, weak but breathing, Walter knew what had to be done. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He could not let Boone suffer his way out. The dog deserved the dignity of a man's courage. Walter pressed his forehead against Boone's. "Just tell me when, old boy. You tell me when, and I will listen." Boone licked his cheek once. And Walter, for the first time in years, let himself cry into the fur of the only friend he had left. Part for the good days and the bad. Walter had never been good at waiting. The years had taught him patience with weather, cattle, and broken machinery. But this kind of waiting, the kind where every cough might be the last, was a punishment he could not fix with a wrench or a prayer. Each morning now was a test. He would wake, listen for Boone's breathing at the foot of the bed, and hold his own breath until he heard the steady rasp that told him the dog had made it through another night. On good mornings, Boone would wag his tail, even nose Walter's hand for breakfast. On bad mornings, he lay still, ribs fluttering like a bird caught under glass. The pills gave Boone flashes of strength. One day he surprised Walter by trotting, stiff but eager, across the yard after a squirrel. The chase lasted only a few seconds before he slowed, but for those seconds he was the Boone of old, the dog who used to run fences at a dead sprint, who'd circle cattle with precision as if born with a compass in his chest. Walter laughed then, real and rough, the sound startling even himself. Boone turned back, tail wagging, proud of what little body he had left to offer. But that night, the cough returned stronger, and Walter sat awake by the stove, stroking his side, whispering, "I know, old boy, I know." Neighbors began to notice. At the post office, Landry tilted her head. "Boone not looking too good. Walt, you taking care of yourself?" He nodded, kept his eyes on the counter. People meant well, but pity scraped like sandpaper. He did not want sympathy. He wanted time. Earl Whitcomb dropped by one evening with a pie his wife had baked. Boone tried to bark when the truck pulled in, but managed only a hoarse rumble. Earl looked down, hand resting on Boone's head. "He is a good one," he said. "You will know when it is time." Walter's throat closed. He hated how people spoke like it was easy, like the knowing came without tearing a man in half. The farmhouse grew quieter with each passing day. No radio, no television, just the creak of floorboards and Boone's breathing. Walter found himself talking more to the dog than he ever had to Nell. telling Boone about small things, the frost on the barn roof, the price of hay, the hawk that nested near the windmill. Boone listened, eyes cloudy but intent, as if every word mattered. Maybe did. At night, Walter would lay the leash across his lap like a talisman. The braid of leather held the smell of years' dust, sweat, rain, and Nell's hands that had woven it. Some nights he prayed Boone would tell him clearly when it was time. Other nights, he begged silently for one more good day. One morning in late October, Boone surprised him. The dog pushed to his feet, shaky but determined, and barked once toward the door. Walter frowned. "You want out?" Boone barked again, louder this time, tail wagging with something that looked like insistence. Walter grabbed the leash. They walked slowly to the pasture, Boone stopping every few yards to sniff the air as though memorizing it. When they reached the pecan tree, Boone sat and looked east, where the sun bled gold across the horizon. Walter sank down beside him, knees stiff. "Is this what you wanted to see?" he asked. Boone leaned against him, body warm but fragile, and for a moment it felt like the world was whole again. The light caught Boone's fur, turning the grey white into silver. But on the way back to the house, Boone stumbled. His legs gave out, and he fell hard into the grass. Walter dropped the leash, scooped him up. Heart pounding. "Easy. I have got you." Back inside, he laid Boone on his blanket, his own shirt damp with dog breath and fear. Boone closed his eyes, chest rising shallow. Walter sat beside him for hours, unwilling to move, unwilling to leave him alone. The next day was worse. Boone would not eat, only drank a little water. The cough rattled him, leaving specks of red on the blanket. Walter changed it, hiding the stained one in the wash as though pretending would erase it. He thought of Jer. Pattle's words. Months, maybe. It had barely been weeks. Walter rubbed Boone's head, tears brimming. "You tell me when." "Boone, I can guess. I can take it from you too soon. But I want to let you hurt. I promise." Boone blinked slow, resting his head against Walter's hand. It was not an answer. Not yet. On a crisp Sunday, Walter tried taking Boone for another ride in the truck. Boone perked up at the sight of the keys, even managed to scramble halfway into the cab before Walter lifted him the rest. They drove the back roads. Windows cracked, autumn air sharp and clean. Boone stuck his nose out, ears flattened, eyes half closed in something like peace. Walter drove past the church where he and Nell had been married. He had not stepped inside in years, but Boone's head lifted, eyes on the white steeple, tail giving a faint thump. Walter swallowed. Maybe dogs remember sacred places better than men do. They parked by the river. Walter carried Boone to the water's edge. The dog sniffed, drank, then stood looking at the slow current. Walter sat beside him, hands on the leash, heart heavy. "This is where I used to take you swimming," he said. Boone gave a small whine, tail moving just once. The river whispered its eternal song, carrying years away downstream. That night, Walter dreamed again. Nell was in the kitchen, Boone at her side. Both young, both whole. She looked at Walter and said, "You do not keep love by holding on, Walt. You keep it by letting go when the time comes." He woke with tears on his face, Boone coughing softly at the foot of the bed. Walter sat up, pulled the blanket around the dog, and whispered, "Not yet. Please. Not yet." Boone pressed against him, and Walter felt the fragile rhythm of his heart like a clock winding down. The days blurred after that, good and bad threaded together. Boone would rally, then collapse, eat one meal, then refuse the next. Walter's life narrowed to the dog's breathing. Each sound a command to stay awake, to keep watch. One evening, as the sun fell red behind the pecan tree, Boone refused to rise. Walter coaxed him, voice breaking. "Come on, just a little walk." Boone looked at him, eyes dim but certain. Walter froze. For the first time, he felt the answer inside that gaze. The leash in his hand grew heavy. Boone was not asking what now anymore. He was telling him. Part 5, the last spark. Walter sat by Boone's blanket until the lamps burned low. The dog had not risen since sundown, only shifted now and then with a grunt of pain. Every time Walter reached for the phone to call Dre Patel, his hand froze. The number was written on a slip of paper taped beside the fridge. All he had to do was dial, say the words, set the time. But the act felt like hammering the last nail in his own coffin. Boone opened his eyes once, cloudy and slow, and met Walter's gaze. The answer was there, not a question anymore. A farewell. Morning brought a brittle frost across the pasture. Walter carried a mug of coffee out to the porch, Boone beside him in spirit if not in stride. The leash lay across his knees. He thumbed the brass tag like he had 1,000 times, remembering Nell's steady hands. Her voice echoed, "Don't waste the days, Walt." But what about when the days themselves were wasted by pain? What did a man do then? Behind him, Boone gave a rasping cough, then tried to rise. Walter hurried inside, helping him steady. To his surprise, Boone pushed toward the door, tail wagging faintly. "You still want outside?" Walter asked, voice cracking. Boone whined, eager despite the weakness. Walter grabbed the leash and followed. They made it only to the yard, Boone stumbling but determined. The pecan tree swayed in the wind, scattering leaves that crunched beneath their steps. Boone paused beneath the branches, nose lifted as if scenting memories carried in the air. Walter knelt beside him. "You telling me this is the place?" Boone leaned into him, breath shallow, eyes steady. Walter felt the world tilt. He saw himself digging a hole under that tree, Boone resting in the earth, where they had shared 1,000 evenings. The thought nearly dropped him to his knees. He shook his head, tears spilling. "Not today. Please. Not today." Back inside, Walter built up the fire. Boone lay close, comforted by the heat. Walter busied himself with small chores, fixing the hinge on the pantry door. wiping dust from Nell's framed photo, anything to keep from calling the vet. At noon, Earl stopped by again, dropping off feed. He saw Boone, thinner than the week before, and looked away quick. "You holding up, Walt?" Walter only nodded, throat too tight to trust. Earl lingered, hat in hand. "Sometimes love means knowing when." Walter's temper flared, "and sometimes it means not giving up too soon." Earl tipped his hat, muttered, "You will know," then drove off, leaving Walter alone with his fury and his fear. That evening, Boone surprised him. The dog rose on shaky legs, walked to the door, and barked a sound hoarse but clear. Walter followed him outside into the crisp dark. Boone shuffled toward the pasture, slow but steady. At the fence line, he paused, gazing out at the emptiness where cattle once grazed. Walter stood beside him, the leash slack in his hand. Boone lifted his muzzle and let out a single, ragged howl. It was not strong, but it carried across the fields like a ghost of what he would been. Walter's breath broke. The howl faded into a cough that racked Boone's body. Walter dropped to his knees, holding him, whispering, "That is enough, old boy. That is enough." They made it back inside, Boone collapsing onto his blanket. Exhausted, Walter sat on the floor, stroking his fur, unable to stop the tears. The dog's eyes, dim but calm, watched him with something like peace. Walter spoke to him as if Nell could hear. "You gave us everything, every damn thing, and I do not know how to thank you except to carry you home when it is time." Boone licked his hand once, then laid his head down. For the next 2 days, Boone hardly moved. He refused food, drank only a little water. The cough worsened, rattling the house like nails in a tin can. Walter sat with him, day and night, afraid to close his eyes. Sleep came in stolen minutes. He dreamed again of Nell, her voice low and sure. "Don't make him linger, Walt. Love does not trap, it frees." When he woke, Boone was staring at him, as if Nell's message had passed straight through. Walter whispered, "I hear you. I hear you both." The phone waited on the counter. Walter picked it up once, dialed the first 3 numbers, then slammed it down. Heart pounding. He could not yet. Not while Boone's tail still wagged when he whispered his name. But the tail wagged slower now. Each thump seemed to cost him more. Walter could not ignore it forever. On the 3rd night, Boone tried to stand. Walter rushed to steady him. The dog walked to the door, leaned against it, then looked back at Walter. Eyes cloudy, but clear enough to say. Walter's hands shook. He opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pecan leaves and distant earth. Boone stepped out onto the porch, paused, then lay down on the boards. He rested his head on Walter's boot. Sighing deep, Walter sank beside him, the leash still in his hand. The leather felt heavier than iron. The stars burned sharp above them. Walter looked up, searching for courage in constellations he could not name. He felt Boone's breathing slow, uneven, each rise and fall a struggle. His chest ached with the weight of the choice. He could call Patil in the morning. He could take the shotgun from the shed, spare Boone one more night of suffering. The thought gutted him. He pressed his forehead to Boone's, whispering, I can be the one. Boone's tail moved once, then stilled. Walter felt the leash dig into his palm. Every braid Nell had woven pressing like a command. Inside, the clock ticked steady. Indifferent, Walter carried Boone back to his blanket, muscles trembling with grief and age. He laid him down gentle, covered him with the quilt. The phone waited on the counter. Walter stared at it long into the night. Finally, he picked it up. His voice cracked when Patel answered. It is? He whispered. The words tasted like rust and surrender. But before dawn, Boone stirred. He stood, shaky but upright, and padded toward the door. Walter followed. Stunned, the old dog walked into the yard, nose to the wind, tail wagging faint but real. He barked once, sharp and alive. Walter froze, torn between wonder and heartbreak. Could he really take Boone's life when the dog still had this spark? Or was this Boone's last gift, one final strength before the end? Part 6. The Rally. The morning after Walter made the call, Boone seemed like another dog. He walked across the yard without stumbling. He sniffed at the pecan tree, even pawed half-heartedly at a squirrel before lying down with a satisfied huff. Walter stood on the porch. Stunned, the leash hung slack in his hand. Had he spoken too soon? Had he betrayed Boone by giving up when the old boy still had strength? The memory of his whispered words, "It is time," burned like a brand on his tongue. When Patel's truck pulled into the drive that afternoon, Walter's chest seized with panic. She stepped out, a leather bag in hand, her expression kind but steady. Boone wagged his tail, trotted a few paces, then greeted her with a lick to the hand. Patel blinked in surprise. "Well now," she murmured. "He looks brighter than when I saw him last." Walter rubbed the back of his neck. "I do not understand it. He was fading on me. Would he eat?" Barely moved. And then this morning. His voice trailed off, fear and relief tangling into knots. Patel crouched, examining Boone gently. Sometimes they rally, a burst of energy before the body gives out. It can last a day, maybe a week, but it does not mean the disease is gone. Walter's heart sank. The leash in his hand felt heavier than ever. Inside, they sat at the kitchen table while Boone rested on his blanket. Patel set her bag down. "I brought the medication. Walt, if you want me to, help him pass." Her voice was careful, but the weight of it pressed like a hand on his chest. Walter shook his head quickly. "Not today. Not while he is like this." Patel nodded. "Not arguing. You will know when he is ready. Don't let guilt make the choice for you. Let Boone tell you." Walter glanced at the dog, who was watching him with cloudy but steady eyes. Boone thumped his tail once, as if to agree. That evening, Boone ate a full bowl of stew. He even nudged Walter's hand for more, something he had not done in weeks. Walter laughed through tears, scratching his ears. "You're not done yet." "Huh." "For a few hours." Hope returned to the house. Walter let himself believe maybe they would get more time, maybe Christmas, maybe spring. But deep down, he knew what Patel had said was true. The rally was not a gift of time. It was a warning. The next morning, Boone rose eager for a walk. Walter slipped the leash over his head, the leather soft and familiar, and together they moved down the lane. The autumn air was sharp, the sky wide and endless. Boone sniffed at fence posts, paused at the gate where cattle used to gather. Walter let him lead, heart aching with every step. They reached the far pasture, where wildflowers had dried to brittle stalks. Boone stood there, chest heaving but tail wagging, looking out across the land as though reclaiming it. Walter laid a hand on his back. "This was always your kingdom," he whispered. For a moment, man and dog stood together, silent in the wind, as if the years had folded into one. But by afternoon, the strength was gone. Boone collapsed trying to climb the porch steps, legs trembling. Walter scooped him up, heart breaking, carried him inside. The cough returned with a vengeance, rattling his frail chest. Each breath sounded like splintering wood. Walter sat beside him, stroking his fur, tears falling unchecked. The rally was over. It had been a flame burning hot just before it burned out. That night, Walter could not sleep. He kept the lamp burning, watching Boone's chest rise and fall. Each shallow breath carved another wound. He remembered Nell's words from the dream. "You do not keep love by holding on. You keep it by letting go." He hated that she was right. He hated that she was not there to carry the weight with him. Boone stirred, shifting closer, pressing his muzzle into Walter's hand. The dog's cloudy eyes held a softness that broke him. It was the same look Nell had given him in her hospital bed years ago, when she whispered, "It is all right to let me rest." Walter crumpled forward, burying his face in Boone's fur. "I can lose you too." He sobbed. Not yet, but Boone's breathing told him otherwise. The next day, Walter called Patel again. "Tomorrow," he said hoarsely. "Come tomorrow." He hung up the phone and sat staring at it, the leash wound tight in his fist. Tomorrow. The word felt like a cliff edge. Boone wagged his tail faintly when Walter walked over. Walter knelt beside him. "We will make this last day count, old boy." They spent the afternoon together. Walter cooked steak, cutting it into small pieces Boone could manage. The dog ate with quiet joy, licking his lips, looking at Walter as if to say thank you. Later, Walter carried Boone to the porch. They watched the sunset paint the sky in bruised reds and golds. The wind rustled the pecan tree, scattering leaves across the yard. Walter leaned against the rail. Boone pressed against his leg. He whispered, "You have given me more than I ever deserved." Boone sighed. Content, his tail brushing once against the boards. When night came, Walter made a bed for Boone beside his own. He lay awake, listening to the shallow rhythm of his breaths. Sleep came in short fits, broken by coughs and the fear of silence. Near dawn, Walter stirred awake to find Boone sitting up, weak but proud, staring at him. The dog's eyes were clearer than they had been in days. Walter froze. He knew this look. It was the same as Nell's on her last morning. Boone was not asking any more. He was giving Walter permission. Walter's chest clenched. He reached for the leash, holding it in his lap, the braid digging into his palms. He thought of Nell's hands, the years they would shared, the love stitched into leather and time. He whispered, "Tomorrow, old boy, tomorrow I will do right by you." Boone laid his head down, sighing once. Walter sat beside him until the sun broke over the horizon, dreading the sound of tires on gravel that would come to carry away what little remained of his heart. Part 7. The Last Perfect Day. Walter woke before sunrise, his chest tight with dread. Boone lay beside him, breathing shallow but steady, eyes half closed. The leash hung on the chair by the bed like a sentence waiting to be carried out. Today would be the last day. Walter knew it, Boone knew it, but knowing did not make the hours any easier. He whispered, "We will make it count, old boy. I swear it." The morning air was cold, crisp enough to sting. Walter wrapped Boone in Nell's old quilt and carried him to the porch. The dog lifted his nose, scenting the wind as though memorizing it. The sky burned pink at the horizon, the kind of sunrise that once promised a day of work and promise. Now it promised only goodbye. Walter set Boone down gently, then sat beside him with coffee in his hands. The silence was full, not empty. The kind of silence men keep when words are too small for the moment. Breakfast was steak again. Walter cut it into small pieces, feeding Boone by hand. The dog chewed slow but steady, licking Walter's fingers after each bite. "You always ate better than I did." Walter chuckled through tears. Boone wagged his tail faintly, as if agreeing. When the plate was empty, Walter set it aside and rubbed the dog's ears. "Best damn cattle dog Chase County ever saw. Nell always said you worked harder than me." Boone sighed, leaning into the touch, eyes closing. Mid-morning, Walter lifted Boone into the truck. The engine groaned awake, and the road stretched out in front of them one last time. Walter drove slow, windows down, letting the cool air sweep through. Boone pressed his nose to the wind, ears back, eyes half shut in quiet joy. It was the same posture he would held for years riding fence lines, hauling feed, watching the land as though it belonged to him as much as Walter. Walter swallowed the lump in his throat. "This is your land, Boone. You kept it safe better than I ever could." They stopped at the river. Walter carried Boone down to the bank, quilt wrapped around him. The water moved slow, shining like glass in the autumn sun. Boone sniffed the air, lapped at the current once, then lay in Walter's lap, watching the ripples. Walter stared at the water too, remembering the summers when Boone had bounded into it, shaking off sprays of river glitter like a wild thing. "You love this place," Walter said, softly. Boone wagged his tail once, as if confirming it. In town, Walter stopped at the diner. He had not stepped inside in months, but today was different. He ordered a burger and fries to go, the same meal he and Nell used to share on Sundays. When he returned to the truck, Boone thumped his tail against the seat. Walter tore the burger in half, offering the dog a piece. Boone devoured it, licking grease from Walter's hand, eyes shining with the faintest spark. For a moment, they were young again, a man, his wife, and the dog, parked by the diner with laughter spilling out the windows. Back at the farm, Walter carried Boone to the pecan tree. They sat together under its shadow, watching the wind move through the grass. The leash lay coiled in Walter's lap, untouched. He thought of Nell, of the day she braided it, of her words, "Love keeps you honest when nothing else does." He wished she were here to help carry this burden. But maybe she was, maybe through Boone's eyes, through his quiet courage. Walter rubbed the dog's neck, voice trembling. "You gave me more than any man deserves. I hope I gave you half as much." Boone leaned into him, the simple weight of loyalty answering in ways words never could. Afternoon light slanted gold across the fields. Walter dozed against the tree trunk. Boone curled against his side. When he woke, the dog was watching him, chest rising slow, eyes soft. Walter whispered, "Don't you worry. I will walk you the whole way." Boone blinked, tail twitching once. It was enough. As the sun sank low, Walter carried Boone back to the porch. They watched the sky burn itself out in reds and oranges. Every color felt sharper, as though the world knew it was being looked at for the last time. Walter spoke low, voice ragged. "You held me together after Nell was gone. You were my reason to wake up, to keep walking. I do not know how I am supposed to do it without you." Boone pressed his muzzle to Walter's wrist, breathing warm and uneven. The touch said everything words could not. "You already know how. You have been doing it all along." That night, Walter lit a fire in the stove. The house glowed warm, shadows dancing across the walls. He laid Boone on the quilt by his chair, the leash beside them both. He poured himself a small glass of bourbon, raised it in a quiet toast. To Nell, to Boone, to the years that mattered. His voice cracked, but he drank it down, the burn anchoring him to the moment. Boone stirred, lifted his head, and gave a soft whine. Walter leaned down, pressing his forehead to the dog's. "Tomorrow, old boy, tomorrow you rest." He did not sleep much. Each breath Boone took sounded fragile, thin as paper. Walter stayed awake, stroking his fur, watching the hours crawl toward dawn. When the sky finally lightened, the sound of tires on gravel reached the porch. Walter's heart lurched. The time had come. He lifted Boone gently, cradling him against his chest. The leash hung over his arm, Nell's braid warm against his skin. Together, they stepped out to meet Dre Patel. Part 8, the longest goodbye. The gravel crunched as Dre Patel's truck rolled to a stop. Walter stood on the porch with Boone in his arms, the leash draped over his wrist like a prayer bead. The morning was cold, pale light just beginning to color the horizon. Boone lifted his head faintly when the engine shut off. His tail brushed once against Walter's arm, as though acknowledging the arrival. Patel climbed out slowly, her face steady but gentle. She carried her leather bag like a burden she never got used to. "Morning, Walt," she said quietly. "Morning, Boone." Walter nodded, unable to find words. His throat was raw from all the things he had whispered in the night. Inside, the house smelled of cedar smoke and coffee. Walter had cleared the space by the stove, laying Nell's quilt across the floor. It was the same quilt she would sewn from old shirts and dresses, every patch a memory stitched into fabric. He lowered Boone onto it, careful as if laying down a child, the dog side, resting his head on the braid of the leash, his cloudy eyes following Walter's every move. Patel knelt beside him. Opening her bag, she spoke softly, explaining each step, though she knew Walter had heard it before. First a sedative, then the injection that would bring peace. Walter's hands trembled. He wanted to shout, to stop it, to beg for another day. But Boone's labored breathing reminded him why they were here. He knelt beside his dog, cupping his face. "Old boy," he whispered, "I am right here. I am not going anywhere." Ashley had come along too. She placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "We will give you as much time as you need." Walter nodded, eyes never leaving Boone. The dog blinked slow, tail moving weakly. It was as if Boone was comforting him, instead of the other way around. Patel drew the first syringe. "This will help him relax. He won't feel anxious. He will just feel sleepy." Walter swallowed hard. "Go ahead." The needle slid beneath Boone's skin. He did not flinch, only kept his gaze fixed on Walter. Within minutes, his breathing eased, his body softening against the quilt. His tail wagged once, slow, then stilled. Walter bent close, pressing his forehead to Boone's. "You are the best thing I ever had after Nell," he whispered. "You carried me through years I did not think I would survive. You were my reason." Boone's eyes fluttered, lids heavy. He sighed, a sound like surrender. Patel prepared the second syringe. She looked at Walter. "Are you ready?" The words stabbed deep. How could a man ever be ready for this? But he nodded, tears streaking his weathered face. "Yes." "Do it." "He is tired." She slid the needle into Boone's vein. Walter held his head gently, whispering every word he could think of. "Good boy. Best boy. Nell's waiting for you. You are going home." Boone's breathing slowed. His chest rose once, fell, then rose again. Weaker. Walter clutched him, desperate to memorize the rhythm. And then, with one last exhale, it was gone. The silence was unbearable. Walter pressed his face into Boone's fur, sobbing from a place deeper than words. He stayed like that for a long time, the leash wound in his fist, the quilt damp with tears. Patel touched his shoulder gently. "I will step outside. Take all the time you need." Ashley followed her, closing the door softly. Walter was alone with his dog. He rocked back and forth, whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for every day." Boone's body was still warm, but the life that had filled it, the loyalty, the spirit, the love had gone somewhere Walter could not follow. When he finally lifted his head, he noticed the brass tag pressed into his palm. Boone. The letters worn, but still clear. Nell's handiwork. Now all he had left of both of them. He kissed the tag, then laid it against Boone's chest one last time. You will always be mine. Always. Patel returned quietly. She had brought a small cedar box from her truck. We can take him for cremation, if you would like, or you can bury him here, whatever feels right. Walter shook his head. Here, by the pecan tree. He belongs to this land. Patel nodded. Ashley helped Walter wrap Boone in the quilt. They carried him together out to the yard. The pecan tree stood tall, leaves drifting down like blessings. Walter set Boone down gently, hand lingering on his side. I will dig, he said hoarsely. No one else. It took hours. Walter's body protested every shovelful, but grief gave him strength. The earth was cold, heavy with clay, but he kept digging until the hole was deep enough, wide enough. When it was ready, he knelt beside Boone's still form. His hands shook as he tucked the quilt around him, as though the dog might still need warmth. The leash he coiled gently on Boone's chest, the brass tag catching a glint of sun. He pressed his forehead to Boone's one last time. Run free. Nell's got supper waiting. Then he lowered him into the earth. Covering the grave broke him all over again. Each shovelful of dirt sounded like a drumbeat, final and unrelenting. He worked until the hole was filled, until Boone was part of the land he had guarded all his life. Walter planted his shovel upright at the head of the grave, a marker until he could carve something proper. Then he sank to his knees, hands in the dirt, weeping until there was nothing left. The wind moved through the pecan tree, carrying leaves across the yard. It sounded like applause, like the earth itself honoring a good dog's rest. That night, the house was unbearably quiet. No soft breathing by the stove, no nails clicking on the floor. Just the crackle of the fire and the hollow space Boone had left behind. Walter sat with the leash in his lap. He traced every braid, every knot Nell had woven. It was no longer just a leash. It was a lifetime, bound in leather. He whispered into the silence, I do not know how to go on. The silence answered with memory. Boone at his side in every season. Nell's laughter carried on the wind. Walter closed his eyes, clutching the leash, and let the grief come like a storm he could not stop. Part 9 after the silence. The first night without Boone was the loudest of Walter's life. The stove ticked. The clock hammered. Coyotes needled the dark beyond the pasture. He kept a hand on the empty quilt as if warmth could return by will alone. At daybreak, he carried coffee to the pecan tree. Frost webbed the grass. His breath showed in small confessions. He touched the mound he would made and said Boone's name out loud, so the earth would know who it was keeping. He set to carving a marker from a cedar plank he found behind the shade. Boone, 2012-2025. Underneath he cut a second line. Good dog. Good years. By noon his hands ached. He planted the cedar at the head of the grave and stepped back. The board looked too small for what it was supposed to hold. Inside, the house had a new geometry. Every room felt a size larger. Walter stood in the doorway to the kitchen, waiting for a sound that would not come. He found the leash on the chair back, the braid worn from the stove and from memory. He looped it around his palm until the brass tag bit into skin. Nels, handiwork. Boone's name. His whole middle life in his hand. He tried to eat. 2 bites stuck like gravel. He put the plate aside and opened a window so the wind could carry the old. Routines out. Toward evening he drove into town to settle the bill. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and kindness. Ashley met him in the doorway with eyes that had slept less than his. Patel came from an exam room holding a small white bag. "There is nothing due today," she said. "Soft but..." "Neighbors have been putting money in the box for months." "You did not hear that from me." Walter blinked hard and nodded once. The kind of thanks a man gives when words won't hold. She set the bag on the counter. "We made you a clay paw print," she said, "and a lock of fur. If it feels like too much, set it aside for another day." He rested a hand on the bag as if it were a living thing. On the bulletin board above the desk, a flyer hung crooked. "Senior Dog Care" in bold letters, and below it smaller words: "Canine arthritis. Palliative care for dogs. Quality of life scale. End of life support." He read without meaning to, catching on phrases the way a torn shirt catches on fence wire. Patel followed his eyes. "We use the hum scale with families," she said quietly. "Hurt. Hunger. Hydration. Hygiene. Happiness. Mobility. More good days than bad. It helps people not feel so alone in the deciding." Walter swallowed. "We measured right," he said. "He told me when." She nodded. "You did right by him, Walt. He was loved. That is the best medicine any of us carry." He held the leash tighter until the brass warmed in his fist. When he turned to leave, Patel stopped herself and then did not. "There is something else," she said. "Only if you want to hear." Walter stood still, as if a sudden move might bring the building down. "We have got a red healer mix in back," she said. "Name is Dolly. Her owner, Hargrove, went into assisted living last week. Dementia. No family that'll take her. She is 12. Arthritis. A heart murmur. Early kidney disease. She needs a soft landing. A medical foster. Maybe hospice care if she declines." The words were not a sales pitch. They were a hand extended in the dark. Walter's mouth went dry. "I just put my dog in the ground yesterday." "I know," Patel said. "I would not ask if it were anything but what Dolly needs. Subcutaneous fluids twice a week. Renal diet. Pills hidden in cheese if she will take them. We will cover meds. You would not be alone." He pictured needles he would never liked. A bag of fluids hanging from a nail in the doorway. The slow drip that keeps life from cracking. He pictured his empty house. He pictured the cedar marker under the pecan tree. "Not today," he said, "but do not place her without calling me first." Patel nodded like a promise. "I want tea." On the way home the sky turned that winter blue that has forgiveness in it. Walter drove the back road slow, letting the truck hum think for him. A hawk pinned the horizon like a nail through paper. That night the coyotes came closer. He stepped onto the porch with the shotgun he would never used for what fear had whispered. He fired a warning into the hill. The sound lipped and died. The coyotes drifted back to whatever hunger had sent them. He sat on the steps long after, the shotgun across his knees, the leash on top of it. 2 tools. One he had needed, one he had refused. He spoke a thank you to the quiet for letting him choose. Sleep came shallow and frayed. Near dawn he dreamed the pasture was a sea and Boone a ship that had slipped its mooring. When he woke, his pillow was damp and the horizon pale. He wrote a letter at the kitchen table, pen scratching slow. Boone. He began and stopped. He started again and let the words be plain, because plain words are the ones that last. You were my good days when there were not many. You taught me to step outside even when the sky looked mean. I won't waste you. He folded the paper and tucked it into the cedar at the grave, under a small stone. The wind lifted and set it again, as if agreeing. The days settled into a new kind of work. He mended a gate that did not need mending. He oiled the hinges of the shed, sharpened tools, stacked wood he would not burn this week or next. He kept catching himself setting a second bowl by the stove. He kept hearing a toenail on the floor that was not there. Grief is a trick door you walk through without meaning to. At the diner, Miss Landry slid him a slice of pie he had not ordered. You look thin, she said. That dog of yours would not have liked it. He ate the pie because it seemed rude not to, and because Nell would have told him to. On the corkboard by the register a fresh flyer leaned on a pin. Old dogs. New Hope Hospice fosters needed. A photo showed a grey-muzzled dog with one cloudy eye lying on a blanket decorated with bones. He took a tab with a phone number without thinking. In the truck he rubbed the paper until it went soft. Then he put it in his shirt pocket behind the place where his heart was making its arguments. Back home he raked leaves from the porch and left the pile on the wind's conscience. He stood at the grave. I do not know how to keep going, he confessed to the cedar sign. The wind set the pecan leaves to a slow applause. A single crow argued with the sky and then flew off, bored with itself. Home is a place and a person and a memory. He had one of the 3 left. Late afternoon brought a phone call he did not expect and did. Patel, I told the rescue we would wait on Dolly until I spoke to you. She said, they have another foster, but it is an apartment. Stairs. Her hips want tea like it. He closed his eyes and saw Boone on the morning he would rallied, trying to climb the porch and failing. Tell me what Dolly needs. He said, warm place to lie down, a yard that remembers how to forgive, gentle hands for arthritis days, subcuids we will teach you, low phosphorus diet, a soft voice when she forgets her courage. He listened to the instructions like a man hearing rain on a roof he thought was done leaking. What if she does not make it long? He asked. Then she won't have to do it alone. Patel said. He hung up and walked the fence line, checking for gaps out of habit instead of need. At the bend near the cotton woods he found an old, blue collar half buried in dust, the cheap kind from the feed store, stamped with size more than with love. He turned it in his hands, carried it home, left it beside Nell's braided leash. 2 lives, 2 chances to get it right. Night gathered like a slow tide. He sat at the table with the clay paw print. He pressed his thumb into the edge, not to change it but to prove to himself it was real. He took the leash to the porch and laid it across his knees. The brass tag flashed once when the stove light shifted. He said what he had been afraid to say out loud. It was not betrayal when I loved Boone after I lost Nell. It won't be betrayal if I love another after I lost Boone. The coyotes sang again. Farther off. He did not reach for the shotgun. He let the song pass through him and out into the pasture where it belonged. Sometime near midnight, the gravel road whispered the way it had the morning before. Headlights stitched light through the pecan branches, and then went dark. Soft knock at the door. Hesitant, like someone touching the world for the first time. Walter opened it to Jur, Plateau's silhouette and the shape beside her. Couldn't he sleep? She said. She could not. Either. Thought we would try a drive. The dog at her side was smaller than Boone. Older, coat flecked red and grey like leaves in late fall. Dolly's eyes carried storms that had already spent themselves. One ear tipped at a funny angle, mended by time or luck. Her breath showed in the cold, the same way Boone's had, but without the rattle. Walter crouched. Hand out, palm up to a future that might still say no. Dolly sniffed, polite as a tired aunt, then leaned her weight against his shin the way dogs do when they decide. He felt it clear as winter, a transfer of trust heavy as a sack of feed and light as forgiveness. Pattle set a small box on the porch rail fluids. Lines, needles capped like tiny white bells, Rinal food in paper sacks. Gabapentin for the worst days. Carprofen only when the kidney numbers would allow. A sheet titled Chronic Kidney Disease in Senior Dogs. Home care with circles around hydration. Appetite and comfort. We will walk you through everything. She said, you can always say no. Walter looked at the leash in his hand. He remembered Nell's fingers moving sure and simple through leather. The day she would braided a promise he was still trying to keep. He slid the loop over his wrist. Not because Dolly would run, but because some ceremonies make a place holy. Come on, old girl, he whispered. Let us show you the pecan tree. Dolly took one step and then another, trusting him to go first and last. At the edge of the yard she stopped and stared toward the cedar plank. The wind moved through the branches with the sound of a shirt being folded away. Walter felt Boone's absence and presence at once, the way a scar can be both ache and armor. He laid his palm on the marker and spoke for both of them. I kept you safe as long as I could, he said. Help me keep her safe now. The leash in his hand felt different then, not a weight. A bridge. Dolly nudged his leg and looked up like a question waiting for its answer. Walter breathed in the cold and let it hurt. He turned toward the house, and together they started across the yard. At the threshold Dolly hesitated, old hips calculating the step. Walter bent and lifted her, careful of joints, careful of a heart that had learned to doubt. He carried her over into the warm, where the quilt waited. He set her down and the room changed shape again, smaller in the right ways. Dolly circled once, twice, and settled with a sigh that sounded almost like relief. Walter sat on the floor beside her and loosened his grip on the leash. The table, the phone lay quiet under the clinic sheet that explained subcutaneous fluids in drawings even a stubborn man could follow. He did not pick it up. He did not have questions he needed answered yet. What he had was the next minute and the one after that. He had a dog who needed a soft voice and a slower pace. He had a grave that said love did not end, it changed jobs. Walter rested his hand on Dolly's shoulder. Her heartbeat tapped against his palm. Small but game. All right, he said. Let us learn each other. From the yard the wind moved like a coat being hung up. The stove ticked as the iron settled. Somewhere in the pasture a coyote decided to sing, and then thought better of it. Walter reached for the leash to hang it where it had always lived. He stopped halfway, kept it in his hand instead. Boone's name lay warm against his skin. He looked at Dolly, at the quilt, at the door that had opened twice in 2 days. Then he whispered the question that would decide the rest of his years. Will you let me carry you to the end? He asked, the way he let me. Part 10. What remains? Dolly settled into the farmhouse as though the walls themselves sighed at her arrival. She found Boone's old spot by the stove and claimed it without ceremony, curling into the quilt still warm from memory. Walter sat nearby, hand on the leash, as if Boone's spirit might approve of the new tenant. The house did not feel full again, but it no longer felt empty. It felt different. A different weight, a different silence, a silence that waited, rather than mourned. The first days were trial and error. Walter learned how to slip the needle beneath Dolly's skin for the fluids. His hands shook at first, but she bore it with patience, closing her eyes until the drip was done. When he whispered, "Good girl," her tail thumped the quilt in steady rhythm. He remembered Boone, then how his tail had thumped in the same way when life asked too much of him. It did not feel like betrayal to remember both. It felt like continuity. Meals were smaller now. Dolly needed soft food. Careful diet. Walter sat with her, coaxing her appetite, telling her stories of Boone, of Nell, of the land. She listened the way old dogs do, with eyes that measure the heart more than the words. Grief still woke him at night. Some mornings he went straight to the pecan tree, sitting by the cedar marker with coffee cooling in his hands. He told Boone about Dolly, about the fluids and the meals, about the way she leaned into his leg when she walked. The wind answered with pecan leaves tumbling down, small reminders that life always sheds and grows again. Walter believed Boone could hear him, maybe not in words, but in the rhythm of care passed from one creature to another. The town noticed too. At the diner, Landry asked, "That a new friend you have got with you?" Walter nodded. Dolly waiting in the truck, nose pressed to the glass. "She is not young," he said. "Not easy." "Neither, but she needed a place." Landry smiled softly. "So did you?" Earl came by one afternoon with spare hay. He watched Dolly limp across the yard. Ears tilted. "You are starting over," he said. Walter shook his head. "Not starting. Just continuing." The days stretched slow into winter. Dolly had good hours and bad ones, just like Boone. Walter grew used to measuring life not in years, but in the steadiness of breathing beside the stove, in the rhythm of a tail brushing the quilt. At night he still dreamed of Nell. Sometimes she was braiding the leash again. Sometimes she was in the garden, calling Boone and Dolly both, her laugh carrying across the pasture. When Walter woke, he no longer wept at the emptiness. He whispered thank you for the fullness that had once been, and for the small fullness returning. By Christmas, Dolly had slowed even more. The fluids kept her steady, but her hips ached. Her breath grew shallow. Walter knew the signs now. He would walk this road before. But this time he was not afraid of the end. He sat with her often beneath the pecan tree, telling her what Boone had already known. You do not have to be strong for me. I will be strong for you. And Dolly, in a quiet way, leaned her weight against him, answering without words. One night in late January, snow dusted the pasture. Dolly lay on the quilt, eyes half closed. Walter stroked her fur. Listening to the slow rhythm of her heart, she lifted her head once, looked at him with a gaze that held no question. Only peace. Walter nodded, tears stinging his eyes. I will carry you. Don't worry. She sighed, lowered her head, and let sleep take her deeper. By dawn, she was gone. Walter buried her beside Boone, under the pecan tree. 2 cedar markers now, side by side, the earth holding what his arms no longer could. He stood with the leash in his hand, wondering how much one heart could carry. But as the wind moved through the branches, scattering snow like petals, he felt no collapse inside, only a strange, steady strength. Grief and love had braided together, like the leather in his hand. One did not erase the other. They coexisted, making something harder to break. Spring returned, as it always does. Grass rose green over the graves. The pecan tree spread new leaves, shading what was buried beneath. Walter tended the markers, sanded the cedar, added stones to keep them upright. Visitors sometimes stopped on the road, asking about the graves. He told them, they were my dogs. They carried me when I could not carry myself. The neighbors understood. Some nodded in silence. Some wiped their eyes. Life did not return to what it was before Nell. It did not return to what it was before Boone or Dolly. It became something else entirely smaller, quieter, but honest. Walter carried the leash often, the brass tag warm in his palm, not as a chain to the past, but as a reminder that love leaves tools behind, tools for surviving, for remembering, for helping the next soul who wanders onto your porch. One evening, a boy from down the road biked up, holding a scruffy pup he would found near the creek. McCready, he said, my folks want he let me keep him. He is too young to be alone. Can you? Walter looked at the pup, for wild, eyes wide with fear and hope tangled together. He felt the old ache rise, but also the old warmth. He nodded slowly. Bring him here. The boy set the pup down. It wobbled forward, then pressed against Walter's boot, the same gesture Boone and Dolly had both made. Walter bent, lifted him, and whispered, all right? Little one, you are safe. That night, the leash hung by the door, waiting for new weight. The pup slept on the quilt, paws twitching with dreams. Walter sat by the stove, staring into the fire. The house was still quiet, but no longer hollow. It was filled with the echo of every dog who had come before, each leaving behind a piece of strength, a reason to keep walking. He lifted his glass in a toast to them all. To Nell, to Boone, to Dolly, to whatever comes next. The fire crackled, the pup stirred, the leash glinted in the lamplight. Walter smiled through tears. Love, he whispered, does not die. It just finds new ways to be carried. This is the truth older hearts already know. We do not keep love by holding on forever. We keep it by letting go when it is time, by carrying forward the lessons, and by opening the door again when love knocks in another form. Dogs teach us that better than any sermon. They do not ask us to promise forever. They ask us to promise today, and to keep that promise with every tomorrow we are given.